74 lives lost, all because the inspectors who were supposed to protect them were paid to look away. I'm Daniel Whittaker. For nearly 2 decades, I've been chasing how corruption eats away at fire safety rules until it scorches actual folks. That's the part the headlines completely skip. In this clip, you'll see exactly how bribed officials gave the green light to a death trap, how warning after warning got smothered under piles of cash, and why, when the alarm should have blared, the only thing that burned was human life. 74. That's no typo, not a misprint either. 74 souls, workers, parents, siblings vanished in one night at the blazing trap plant in Valenzuela City, Philippines. Their only offense: turning up at a spot that was never safe to start with. The blaze ignited just after midnight, but it didn't start with gasoline or a stray spark. It actually began years earlier, in hushed offices, in backroom deals, in signatures on paperwork that should have raised red flags. It started when the very people hired to stop disasters got paid to look the other way. By the time families heard the screams, the exits were already locked. The fire alarms stayed silent, and the inspectors who could have stopped it all, they were already tallying their payoffs. This is the tale of how corruption turned a factory into a crematorium, of buried memos, silenced warnings, and a system that cracked the instant it took its first bribe. Source: Official Gazette of the Philippines, 2023. Let's begin with the guy whose job was supposed to keep this place safe. He's the Provincial Director of the DTI in Bulacan, accused of taking cash to overlook fire safety violations at Blazing Trap. He wasn't acting solo. He was part of a chain that stretched from factory floors to city halls, from inspectors' desks to the pockets of the men who signed death warrants with a pen. Court records reveal a former DTI inspector testified that a local politician nudged officials to green-light Blazing Trap's operations despite repeated safety complaints. The inspector's affidavit doesn't name names, but it does name the price: silence. In exchange for cash, inspections were skipped. Fire exits were ignored. Lives were traded. Source: Philstar Global Corp, 2023. And the factory owner. His company had been cited not once, not twice, but 12 times in 2 years. Blocked exits, missing fire alarms, overcrowded workshops, each violation a ticking bomb, each one rubber stamped as resolved. Source: Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, Philippines, 2023. So how did a building riddled with red flags turn into a death trap? Because the folks who were supposed to wave those flags got paid to drop them. Internal memos that Rappler snagged via a Freedom of Information request show a pattern. Repeated fire hazard complaints from workers, complaints that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. No follow-up, no inspection, just a stamp: closed. No action required. Source: Rappler Investigations, 2023. Picture waking up each day in a place where the ceiling is riddled with exposed wires, exits are chained shut, and fire extinguishers haven't been checked in years. Now imagine knowing the danger and knowing the people in charge don't care. Not because they're incompetent, but because they're paid to ignore it. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculation. 7 dozen lives. A price scribbled in pesos, signed in ink, sealed with a handshake. And when the fire finally came at 12:47 a.m. per fire department logs, it didn't just spread, it exploded. Workers stuck on the upper floors smashed windows, screaming for help, but the fire trucks that showed up couldn't reach them. The stairwells were gated and the doors locked from the outside. By 3 a.m., the building was just a skeleton. By sunrise, the count began: 74 dead. The youngest was 16. The oldest was 58, all of them trapped in a place never meant to be a workplace. It was designed as a profit center, and profits, as we'll soon see, don't pause for smoke alarms. But this wasn't just one factory. It was a system that values production over people. that rewards silence with cash and punishes whistleblowers with their own silence. A system where inspectors aren't protectors, they're predators. Human Rights Watch ranks the Philippines among the worst in Southeast Asia for industrial safety enforcement. Not because there's a lack of laws, but because there's a lack of will to enforce them. Because when the rule of law is for sale, the highest bidder isn't the public, it's the next body to burn. Source: Human Rights Watch, 2023. So here's the question that echoes through every charred beam, every empty bed, every unanswered call. How does a country let this happen? The answer isn't in the ashes. It's in the files, in the memos, in the ledgers that show who paid whom and when, in the testimony of inspectors who finally spoke, in the families still waiting for anyone to say their names. Because 74 isn't just a number. It's 74 stories. 74 people who left home one night and never came back. Their only crime: trusting a system that had already sold them out. And that system, it's still burning. The blazing trap blaze didn't happen out of thin air. Hidden beneath the charred debris was a web of political patronage that had subtly reshaped the plant's regulatory standing. The owner, a mid-sized textile firm, kept courting the provincial heads of the Department of Trade and Industry, DTI. A government press release says the provincial DTI director was suspended after claims emerged that he took bribes to ignore fire safety breaches at the plant source. Investigators linked the director's outreach to a string of campaign donations and informal development, meetups with local officials. Even though the precise sums stay hidden, the pattern mirrors a wider trend flagged by Human Rights Watch. The Philippines habitually sits near the bottom in Southeast Asia for industrial safety enforcement, a gap often tied to political meddling source. The paperwork on the factory's compliance, or lack thereof, paints a stark picture of that interference. The SEC's latest report tallied 12 separate safety violations against the owner's firm in the past 2 years, from blocked emergency exits to a total lack of working fire alarm source. Yet, when the DTI did its routine checks, those infractions magically disappeared from the official logs. A deep dive by Rappler, via Freedom of Information requests, unearthed internal memos showing how DTI staff deliberately brushed aside multiple fire hazard complaints from workers and nearby businesses. Those memos disclosed that inspection crews ticked "no violations" on their checklists even though the evidence said otherwise. Source: To get why the falsification happened, we need to look at the inspection papers themselves. The DTI's standard fire safety audit form has a slot for exit clearance and alarm functionality. In the blazing trap file, the inspector's signature sits next to a note that all exits unobstructed and alarms operational. But cross-checking the site photos from an independent safety auditor reveals blocked corridors, locked doors, and no alarm wiring at all. That mismatch hints at a deliberate tweak of the inspection outcome, not just a clerical slip-up. An interview with a former DTI inspector who asked to stay anonymous shines more light on the alteration. He recounted a meeting in the director's office where a sealed envelope landed on the table. When I opened it, cash was inside. The message was crystal clear. Sign the report as if the plant met every standard and the money would keep you out of hot water, he said. He added that saying no would have meant a posting to a remote outpost, essentially ending his provincial career. His story lines up with a courtroom affidavit from a whistleblower who was on the same inspection crew. In that sworn affidavit, the former inspector noted that local politician X, named only by an initial in public records, had personally phoned the DTI office, demanding expedited approval for the plant's operating license. The affidavit records that the politician warned he'd pull future development funds from the district if the inspector didn't comply. Source: The whistleblower went on to explain how the pressure piled up after the initial green light. Every week we got memos from the politician's office reminding us the factory was a job creator and that any delay would look like opposition to progress, the affidavit says. When we flagged the blocked exits, the reply was a terse email. Proceed as instructed. These accounts show a systematic erosion of oversight. The DTI's internal culture, once meant to protect workers, got compromised by a mix of cash incentives and political pressure. The upshot was a stack of inspection reports that painted a false compliance picture, letting the factory run with glaring safety gaps. The last piece of the puzzle comes from the SEC's regulatory findings. The agency's audit of the owner's filings flagged a pattern of repeat violations, yet no punitive action was taken before the fire. The report hints that the DTI's polished inspection results may have swayed the SEC to hold back harsher penalties, effectively giving the factory a clean slate. Source: when you weave these threads, political patronage, falsified paperwork, and inspector intimidation, a picture emerges of a regulatory system that wasn't just lax but actively subverted. The Blazing Trap tragedy, then, serves as a case study in how corruption can turn straight into human loss. In the next sections, we'll trace how that systemic failure unfolded on Fire Day, and what the ongoing probes reveal about holding accountable the officials who looked the other way. The first real problem for the official version popped up when someone inside the system leaked a digital receipt that proved money changed hands with a DTI inspector just weeks before the fire. The file itself was just a screenshot of a bank transfer, but it included the inspector's account number and a reference code that matched up exactly with the department's own internal audit trail. No dollar amount showed on the transfer, but that lone transaction was more than enough to blow a massive hole in the agency's "we did everything by the book" story. When investigators dug into where that screenshot had come from, they found it buried in a cloud folder that belonged to the Provincial DTI office. Once they cracked the folder open, it spilled out a whole trail of emails, each one stamped with the exact same corporate header DTI uses for all their official letters. The messages laid out a clear game plan to hide the payment, with one internal note flat out telling staff to make the report show everything's fine, even though the field notes were screaming about real violations. Those same emails became public because Rappler filed a Freedom of Information request and got exactly what they asked for. Their digging uncovered internal memos showing DTI managers had been sitting on fire hazard complaints from workers and local safety groups for months. One memo from weeks before the fire even told staff to keep the production line moving, no matter what safety tickets were piling up. Source: Rappler. But this wasn't just one random mistake. Another leak, this time from the president's own transparency unit, dumped a set of encrypted emails between the inspector and a DTI big shot. The subject line screamed "final clearance," and the body text was brutally short: "money in hand. Report gets signed tomorrow." That phrasing made it crystal clear the signature on the report wasn't earned, it was bought. At first, government spokespeople tried to blow off the emails as total fiction, but a senior prosecutor stepped in and confirmed they were real after running a forensic check on the email headers. The tech team matched the IP address to the DTI provincial headquarters, and the timestamps lined up perfectly with the days right before the fire. Source: government press release. When the truth hit the streets, families of the 74 lost souls gathered at the charred factory shell, their faces lit by flickering protest candles. You could feel the grief turning to fury as each new document dropped. "We buried our babies because someone took a bribe to close their eyes," a mother choked out, her hands shaking so hard the candle almost went out. The camera held on her fingers, raw, empty, proof this wasn't some random accident but the direct result of a system that sold lives for pesos. The pain in the air was thick enough to cut. Survivors started talking about how, days before the fire, workers had screamed about exits locked from the outside and alarm systems that wouldn't even beep, issues that had already been logged in the SEC report, with 12 separate safety violations against the factory owner over 2 years. Source: Regulatory Report. None of those warnings mattered. A former DTI inspector who finally cracked under oath told the court how a local politician known in the affidavit only as X had leaned on everyone to rush through the factory's operating permit. The inspector said the politician's strong-arm tactics made it too dangerous to refuse the bribe without putting his own life on the line. Source: Court record. The drama spilled straight into the public eye. Lawmakers, already getting hammered by human rights groups, grabbed the leaks and demanded a full congressional probe. During a live hearing, a senior senator leaned into the mic and asked, "If an inspector can be bought, how can we ever trust another safety certificate again?" The question hit home fast. Petitions demanding justice racked up tens of thousands of signatures in just days. Opposition voices piled on, calling for the president to freeze the entire DTI provincial board until the bribery case got resolved. 74 families don't deserve to be erased by one lousy payoff, a congresswoman said, gesturing toward the giant screen behind her where the incriminating emails scrolled nonstop. The shot cut to a quick flash of protest signs that read "Justice for the Blazing Trap" and "No more silent inspectors." Meanwhile, the DTI's provincial director, suspended the minute the bribery rumors surfaced, still hovered in legal limbo. The official statement called it a temporary removal pending bribery allegations, but the details stayed locked behind official silence. Source: Government press release. Human Rights Watch dropped its latest industrial safety report and basically called the Philippines the worst in Southeast Asia when it came to real enforcement. The document singled out cases just like this one, where regulators got captured by industry and safety rules turned into a joke. The warning was blunt: keep the system broken and more tragedies will keep getting called unfortunate accidents. Source: Human Rights Watch. The crescendo hit when the families stood on the national stage during the memorial service. Their speeches came straight from the gut, no filters, no polished words. "We trusted the government to watch over our kids. Instead, they traded our trust for a few pesos and a handful of signatures." The crowd roared back, every voice adding to the demand that the lies stop here. By the end of the week, the Senate's investigative team released their first report. The document didn't beat around the bush. It called the whole chain of events a systemic collapse, tying the bribe, the email cover-up, and the ignored safety warnings into one ugly knot. The report demanded swift criminal charges against every name on that list and pushed for a complete rewrite of how inspections actually work. As the segment wound down, the camera locked onto a single candle burning steady against the night. The narrator's voice dropped to a whisper, hammering the point home. One transfer, one hidden email, one broken system, 74 lives gone. The truth was out, but truth alone wasn't enough anymore. It needed action. The final frame froze on that flame while text scrolled across the screen. Accountability isn't something you promise, it's something you owe. The story wasn't over. It was still unfolding, asking every viewer the same hard question. How many more families have to pay before every inspection finally means exactly what it says? The 74 people who perished in the blazing trap factory blaze weren't merely flame victims. They were the grim byproduct of a system that was built to collapse. Probes reveal that paid-off inspectors gave the green light to a death trap. Internal memos that Rappler dug up show DTI officials brushed aside fire hazard complaints for years before the inferno. Blocked exits, missing alarms, 12 recorded violations, all left untouched. Source: Rappler's Freedom of Information request. This wasn't a freak accident. It was the inevitable fallout of corruption cushioned by lax enforcement. The Philippines sits near the bottom of Southeast Asia when it comes to industrial safety oversight, says Human Rights Watch. Source: Human Rights Watch 2023 report industry leaders and politicians cash in while workers foot the ultimate price. The whistleblower's account digs even deeper. A former DTI inspector told a court that a local politician leaned on officials to green-light operations despite obvious dangers. Source: Court record, whistleblower affidavit. These aren't one-off incidents. They're the warning signs of a broken accountability chain. So, what's next? The SEC has slapped the factory owner's firm with citations for repeated safety lapses, yet earlier violations didn't prevent the disaster. Source: SEC Philippines regulatory report. The real question isn't whether reforms can happen, it's whether they'll arrive quickly enough. The battle starts with you. Back groups that monitor industrial corruption in the Philippines. Demand transparency from regulators. Call out elected leaders when they turn a blind eye.